Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on this virtual stage of the Bologna Children's Book Fair online edition, the second online edition. Unfortunately, we can't wait to welcome you all in Bologna next year, hopefully. And thank you very much to the speakers, and thank you very much to Ivanka Annenberger, who has been helping us since last year in creating a comics corner and has helped us put together this amazing panel. Yes, as I told you, we were meant to get started with an exhibiting corner focused on comics and graphic novels last year. Then we had to cancel the fair. We postponed the birth of this area to this year, and then again we have to postpone it. But the good news is that we have quite active and interesting comics corner on the Global Rights Exchange platform that is our digital copyright marketplace. We launched it last year and we have strongly improved it in the last months, and so we are now at the second release with a bigger focus on comics. Of course, at the Bologna Children's Book Fair, we have had many exhibitors who used to publish comics and graphic novels, but they have always been spread across the fair and not all gathered in a special area. And in the meantime, there are some publishing houses that are mostly focused on comics for general comics for adult and not focused only on children that have never attended Bologna, and they are starting to look at us with more interest. There's no need to say how much the sales and the titles in numbers and in qualities have increased in the last years. In Italy too, this is a huge growth, month by month, year by year, we are seeing a huge increase. And this is why we decided to focus more on this area of children's publishing. As I said at the beginning, I do hope to be able to meet you all in Bologna next year. The dates are already decided. It will be in March from 21st to 24th. Now, Tim, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for joining us. I understand it's being recorded, so there'll be a lot of viewers that watch this later. What I want to do is start with a brief introduction of our panelists, Joan and Kathleen and Molly, and have them tell everyone a little bit about themselves, but also specifically in reference to comic books and graphic novels and their relationship with the medium, and sort of just bring us a little up to speed. Why don't, in some vague semblance of alphabetical order, why don't we just start with Molly?
Hello, I'm Molly O'Neill. I'm an agent with Root Literary. I have worn a lot of different hats in the publishing industry over the years. I worked in marketing for Clarion Books, part of Houghton Mifflin, for HarperCollins. I was an editor at HarperCollins. I worked for a startup, and for the last 5 years, I've been agenting. It has been a surprising delight how much of my list, as I've been building a list over the last 5 years, has been about graphic novels and comics. If you had asked me to predict when I started, I'm not sure I would have realized. I ran a tally right before this panel, and I've sold 24 graphic novels in the last couple of years. Some of those multi-book projects, obviously, but still like an exciting percentage of my list. Several other agents at the agency also represent graphic novels, illustrators, writers of graphic novels. And I think for myself, I read comics in the newspaper growing up, but I was not a huge consumer of graphic novels or comics. I think for me, I sort of came in through the illustration side. I worked a lot on picture books in other parts of my career, and so visual storytelling in that medium was part of what paved my way in. And then once I realized that this was an area I wanted to do business in, I've done a lot of catching up ever since. My clients are very good about telling me things I should be reading, or indie zines that are exciting to them, etc. So it's a place where there is so much growth, which we're going to talk about.
Great, that's great. Okay, let's go with Kathleen.
I'm Kathleen Ortiz, and I'm with New Leaf Literary. I have been in the industry for a while. I got my start actually in translation rights. I was the director of translation rights for our agency for almost, 8 years, and then made the switch to full-time agenting. I kind of like Molly, I loved reading comic strips when I was younger. Did not think I would focus on comics and graphic novels when I got my start in the industry, and then found a few clients and decided, wow, this is where my passion lies. This is what I love. And so I'd say now easily 95% of my list is graphic novels and comic artists. A lot of my clients are webcomic artists found on Instagram or Tumblr or Twitter. And there's this really unique skill in being able to have a full narrative and a punchline in only 4 to 6 panels. And that's what I love about working with webcomic artists specifically, because it's almost like the start of a bigger story. And so working with them to expand that story into a full graphic novel, or seeing their separate private Instagram account with the range of their illustrations and saying, okay, you can write a story. Maybe we have to brainstorm a different character and find the way in that way. And it's just, there's so much content out there and so many ways to find talent that it's a lot of fun, and it's great to strategize with them. The other thing, because of my background in translation rights, I'm actually always thinking of global opportunities. So several of my clients are located in Germany, Belgium, Colombia, and they already have this built-in international audience, which eventually really helps with book sales.
That's fantastic. And Joan, why don't you bring up the rear there?
Yes, I'm Joan Paquette. I'm with Erin Murphy Literary Agency. I've been an agent for about 12 years. I really started exclusively on the text side. I assumed I would always be sort of a writer's agent. And yet I sort of had this opening. I had this sort of historic childhood love of comics and that sort of visual form. And it turns out that graphic novels, I guess a little bit like some of you were saying, ended up being sort of my gateway into working more on the art side. And I still don't have a huge percentage of art clients, but the ones that I do have are largely on the graphic novel side. And I just find that it's the perfect marriage of the story and the art coming together in such a dynamic way. There's so much you can do with it. And it feels like such a growing and fresh and exciting medium, where creators who had not maybe had the opportunity to find a voice in traditional publishing are now, comics, I think historically have been a lot on the indie side and on sort of zines and grassroots operations. And I think it's just very exciting to see that area start to grow and explode. And I guess we're, not to get ahead of our topic, but yeah, that's been a really fantastic and exciting delight for me in watching my list grow into that art side as well.
That's great. I'll one point of order just to follow that up. If anybody listening wants to ask a question, put it into the chat function. I can't promise that we'll get to it, but I'll keep an eye on that. And if something comes through as we're going, I'll try to ask that. I'm just a moderator, but it's interesting. I have a lifelong passion for comic books and graphic novels. I'm half tempted to walk you over to my bookshelf and just show you the collection, but but I've only been an agent now for 5 years or so after 20 plus years as an editor. And it's, so to me, I'm only getting started with representing graphic novels as I'm getting started with representing anything. And it's definitely growing. But question for the three of you, would you, I think it goes without saying that we're having a boom in the US at the moment for graphic novels, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But would you say the three of you had already begun representing graphic novels prior to the boom, where when you each of the three of you, when you went out with your first graphic novel project, was it before that? Was it more of a slog when you got started, or are you sort of in sync with the boom? You were just getting into it when everyone else was getting into it. Anyone can just jump in.
Yeah, I started selling them probably like 6 years ago, and over time, I think what editors and publishers are looking for in graphic novels has grown a lot, which is fantastic. And so I feel like now they're more open to a variety of genres and storylines, in children specifically, and even ages. Like I feel like 6, 7, 8 years ago, selling a graphic novel picture book would have raised a question mark, and now it's just everyone wants it. So
yeah, I do find that there is that sort of curve in publishing where there's that moment where editors and publishers decide we want more of this on our list, but then there's always that several years or whatever the gap is where everyone wants it, but nobody quite knows what it looks like. So we get a lot of, we want graphic novels, but is this what, and so it's, I feel like the last, as of starting like 5 years ago or so, there was a lot of that kind of learning curve where, people are figuring out what works on their list, developing their list, a lot of publishers opening specific imprints and kind of narrowing down that focus. So I think that for me has gone a long way to now where a lot of publishers are starting to get in the groove of it and see, this is what sells for us. This is what we don't have enough of. This is what we have a lot of. And you feel the ball start to get rolling in a very exciting way.
Yeah, I think for me, I started by building a list of illustrators, and a number of my graphic novelists began by doing other illustration work. They were doing sort of illustrated hybrids, they were doing picture books. And so I was already building that illustrator list. But when I realized graphic novels were sort of gaining this momentum, I spent probably the better part of a year talking with the editors who were doing them, which was really interesting because even 7 years, 10 years ago, there was like the one person in a publishing house who understood graphic novels, and you just sort of got shuttled to that person if you were trying to do something in that space. And when we first started having these conversations, I remember asking questions like, well, what do you need to bring a graphic novel to acquisitions? And it was like, what do we need to bring a graphic novel to acquisitions? We kind of had to figure that all out together, because it's different than how the submission for a novel or for a picture book or any other kind of project works. And even that is sort of funny. I find myself telling creators a lot, every graphic novel I have sold has looked very different when we pitched it. A lot of that based on the creator's process and how their brain works. Did they start with the building blocks of text? Did they start with the art? Do they need to move the two around simultaneously, like they're the choreographer at a stage in front of them? And so that has been interesting. I think we've gotten things as systemized as we can, but also it is so new and so different that just when you think you know how this is done, someone comes along and breaks the way we do it, and then you learn from that.
That's great. I was at Henry Holt and Company 20 years ago, if it was a day, when Mark Aronson first acquired and published Pedro and Me, black and white, young adult, true memoir-esque. And boy, was that ahead of its time. it's, and you know, and then it was in my memory, it was Jenny Holmes, Baby Mouse that really kind of started to break things open. And I have a theory, you know, taking the long view of, say, well, not just 50 years, but going all the way back. I have a theory about what has contributed to this boom in the publishing of graphic novels in the book world. In the, you know, there were always staple bound floppy comics, but I really, in my opinion, that, you know, books of quality, graphic novels of high quality got acquired and got published and started to undermine this societal judgment that comics had little value, that they were pulp, that they were, you know, not literary, that they weren't good for kids. I, you know, as a kid, and I still have big sets of it, I read all the like classic novels in comic book form. You know, there was, I always saw the value in it, but the gatekeepers, librarians, teachers, parents, there was a stigma that I think retarded the publication of such fare in the literary world. And then you know, you get some big mainstream successes that sell a lot of copies. Then you get something like, you know, Roller Girl winning a Newbery, and then it just breaks right open, just like open the floodgates, so to speak. Does that, you know, it's just a theory, but do you feel like that's been part of the boom? Is that the gatekeepers have said, oh no, this is of value, this is worthwhile?
I think it has to start, because it's children's publishing, with the parents and the buyers. And if the buyers are there and the numbers are going up and the demand is there, then the publishers say, oh, that there's something here that we should focus on because there's a demand for it. So I think that is probably, you know, whether it's kids asking parents for it or kids outright buying it, that's probably what started the trickle.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to typically sell kids on comic books. They just love them by default, no matter where you are.
I was just going to say, I think on the creator side, and kind of like Molly was saying, with artists who maybe had done different mediums moving into comics, I wonder if sometimes a little bit of what you were saying, Tim, is sort of like giving yourself permission to move into a different sphere, to where maybe that was something that was always in your mind or at the back of your mind or never in your mind. But then, like you said, things start to become more hungered for, more requested, more acknowledged. There's more space for it. There's awards. And with that possibility, suddenly it opens doors of creativity that maybe would never have been walked through, because, you know, 10, 20 years ago, maybe it just wasn't a thing. Create a mainstream, traditionally published comic, and you just never would have even gone down that door. But once it's been done, and once it's starting to be recognized, then suddenly the excitement and the hunger builds in a way that hadn't been seen before. And I think that is something that feeds on itself and that grows. And I think that's one of the big contributors, is not even like, oh, they're doing it, so I want to do it, but more like, oh, wow, I can do this in a way that maybe I couldn't do it before. And I think that leads to a lot more energy and, you know, ball rolling downhill thing.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
the opportunity to express themselves in different artistic ways and storytelling, I think, is always exciting for everyone.
My pet theory on the boom has been partly that not everyone can do it. And so while it's been a boom, the pace has been different than other huge trends that we've seen in publishing over the last 10, 20 years. You know, when paranormal YA was so huge, when dystopian YA was so huge, everyone who could write was writing those things. And it flooded the marketplace to a point that, of course, there were a few things that rose to the top, but there were so many other things sort of sharing the pie. Whereas with this, because of the time it takes to produce a graphic novel, I mean, the minute you sell it, you know, maybe 3 years down the line, you get to hold it in your hands. So I guess the creator time has spaced it and paced it a little bit, but also the fact that not everyone can play in this space has actually kind of given it more air and fed it a little bit. It's also, it's very funny when you watch kids read graphic novels, because we look at it and think, oh, there's 2 or 3 years of my life, and my client who sat down every day and drew from for hours, and you've got a 9-year-old who finishes it in 2 hours and is like, great, where's the next one? So there is this hunger to keep reading. I think for many kids, once they read one, they want to read many more by that author in that series. But if that's not possible, then they'll jump to whatever feels like a read alike. But definitely the fact that not everyone who wants to write a book can start in graphic novels is some of it.
Just to build on what you're saying, Molly, I think that a very interesting thing about the graphic novel boom or the comic boom is that, unlike paranormal or dystopian, which is very it's a set, like if you're reading a set path, if you're reading a dystopian novel, you have a general sense of what the broad parameters of the story, romance, if it's a werewolf book, whatever. Whereas graphic novel it's not a genre, it's a whole medium. It's like saying middle grade, or it's like saying YA. Like, a comic is so many things. It can be humor, it can be realistic, it can be memoir, it can be paranormal, dystopian. So it's not, I think, as prone to flooding in the same way, because it's that door that just opens so many worlds instead of just one straight tunnel. And I think that is another thing that just contributes to the variety, because it's so many worlds that are a possibility opening up.
And it's boundary jumping in ways. And I know not every country has the very strict boundaries that the US does, where, these are the picture books and these are the middle grade novels for like 8 to 12-year-olds. And this is YA. I know other countries, it's much more fluid to begin with. But for us, I think one of the interesting things is that not all of these books fit in just one space. They can be read equally differently, of course, but equally by a precocious 9-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 20-something. And some of the projects I've sold recently, it's been very much a part of the conversation at the point of acquisition of, how are we going to publish this? Are we going to publish this as middle grade? Are we going to publish this as YA? And the last time I had that round of conversations with publishers, different publishers had different ideas of how they were going to publish this particular project. And it was based a lot on historically what that house had been doing well. But in each conversation, we sort of settled at, but also we're probably going to have this conversation at least 3 more times before it gets published, because the market is changing so quickly that what we think of and the way we're defining it today may look different, or the opportunities may look different by the time it's ready to hit the market.
Well, let me use that as a segue. That very last thing you said, it was just one of the questions I was teeing up. Do you, and we're at the moment we're talking about the American market in particular. We'll start to talk about the international market in a moment. But are you finding that certain types of graphic novels or certain types of stories are selling better, are more easily into the editors and the houses as opposed to others? And just to give you an example, I mean, not to answer the question before I let you answer the question, but I'm starting to really see that, contemporary coming of age stories is kind of the sweet spot. And anything that's, in a different genre doesn't have, as wide an appeal. And again, I'm talking about with editors and publishers, for example, outer space science fiction, I'm finding is not as automatic as coming of age, modern day contemporary story. Are you finding there are certain types of things that are working better? But as you, and again, not to jump on the answer, but I do appreciate it's always changing, so that maybe that's the answer. But what's going on like these days at the moment?
Yeah, I would definitely agree that contemporary, especially stories, if they're informed by the creator's real life. I think that's a special draw, stories that draw from experience, but definitely from what I've seen, contemporary is particularly strong. And I would also say humor, and sort of young humor. I wouldn't say that others aren't selling, but I think that the biggest demand that I see, the broadest readership is in that area.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to suggest that others weren't selling, but it's harder for, animals in spacesuits than it is for, 11-year-old struggling with ubiquitous challenges that all 11-year-olds struggle with.
The animals in spacesuits always have a hard time, no matter whether they're illustrated or not. They just got it right.
Yeah, that's true. Molly, Kathleen, you want to add to that at all?
I think there was a moment that was really interesting where it seemed like, okay, we all recognize middle grade graphic novels are this particularly desirable thing. And I sort of assumed that the next place the audience was going to grow was into YA, which there is some of it. There are some very popular YA graphic novels. There are, again, things that sort of, especially memoir, it doesn't stop at a particular age. It stops when the character reaches whatever realization or point in their life. But in fact, while I think YA is growing, and I think it's something we're all kind of keeping an eye on, because obviously all those consumers of middle grade graphic novels are probably going to want to keep reading graphic novels, and we need to make some for them as they get older. The publishers have skewed in the other direction and are looking increasingly for young graphic novels at the sort of early reader chapter book age. I think understanding that, there's this visual literacy thing that connects to developmental early reader, kind of like, that maybe this is a way we're going to turn some kids who don't think of themselves as readers into readers, so that they can read every other kind of book forward.
Yeah, and I feel like Joan and Molly hit the nail on the head with those, so I don't have too much to add. So
I don't want to get into it, but do any of the three of you represent adult graphic novels? The reason I ask is you were talking about, their middle grade is hot. Like, it just couldn't be hotter for the medium. And YA is like, not catching up in a way. And I'm finding that adult is like a whole different arena, like just utterly different. The economics of it are different. The publishers are different, kind of obviously. So out of curiosity, are any of the three of you struggling with adult graphic novels?
I have a couple of adult graphic novelists on my list. A couple we've sold and they've done quite well, but it's not your traditional graphic novel multi-panel storytelling. I think we've played with different formats that fit the brand and fit their storytelling preference. Since a lot of my clients are webcomic artists, they tend to like the shorter stories or the punchlines, and I feel like that doesn't translate quite as well on the adult side as it does the children's, so we end up skewing children's most of the time. But I agree, the adult graphic novel market is a completely different game,
and it's not it's not having a boom. Would you say it's not following the boom that middle grade is having?
Yeah, and not from what I've seen. I think children's, it's newer, and so it's more obvious that it's a boom right now. So
yeah, and then same with YA. We're not really seeing a substantial growth in it. Certainly not on the same trajectory that middle grade has enjoyed in the last few years.
I think that's coming. I think we've seen some YA graphic novels that have been award winners or that have gained popularity. I think we're starting to see YA authors who are writing graphic novels. And so I feel like we're a breath away from, or maybe a couple big breakout hits away from YA graphic novels becoming a more talked about space, or frankly, the readers arriving and demanding.
Great. Yeah. Well, I hope you're right.
I would add to that what I was thinking was that what makes something take off in an area or a genre is that breakout. You know, it's you never know, you never quite know when it's going to happen, when something kind of catches the, you know, the momentum, and it really is that one book or that one series or that collection of books that suddenly catch the wind, and then it's hot, and that's, you know, until that happens, it isn't, and then suddenly it is almost overnight sometimes. So I feel exactly like Molly said, that, you know, maybe we're wishful thinking here as far as being on the verge of it, but it does feel like that momentum is building, and with so much energy around the younger age groups, you just gotta you gotta figure that's bound to translate over to the teens eventually.
I think we're
And,
also starting, oh, sorry. I
no,
was
go
just gonna
ahead.
say, I think we're starting to see publishers thinking of graphic novels as one more possible format for a book. The last year in particular, I've gotten a lot of inquiries for illustrators where a publisher has a book that was a novel first, that had a long beloved life, and they're thinking about a graphic novel edition as a way to breathe some sort of fresh air, bring a new readership to it. I think we saw some obvious examples with A Wrinkle in Time did that beautifully, but it's interesting seeing the books that editors are imagining could have a graphic novel life. Sometimes it makes lots of sense. Other times it's like, well, this is a novel that performed very well as a novel, but does it have the visual sensibility that lends itself to a graphic novel? Or are you just trying to extend the life of it? So, but that's been a new and sort of interesting evolution as well. I think that in some ways shows the way publishers are recognizing, like, this is a significant revenue stream sometimes.
Right. You know, it's that moment where I just lost my train of thought. I had that question right there in my head. Not to, you know, I don't want to focus on the negative, but I also don't want to paint a misleadingly rosy picture. Do you feel that a glut is coming? We touched upon, Molly in particular, that, you know, there's reasons that we haven't been overwhelmed, but there's still more and more titles. You know, if you look at just Random House's like summer launch, you know, it's just like a sea of graphic novels. Is a glut coming? Are we, you know, I guess we're particularly talking about middle grade. Are you finding any slowdown in your submissions, acquisitions, any signs that you know, a tsunami's coming?
I guess I kind of feel like you have that risk with any area, any genre, any age group. From my perspective, I feel like I'm just looking for quality material, and I think the quality books are going to make their own space. And I mean, are there more now than there ever have been? Yes. I mean, at what point does it become a glut, or does it become a flood? I don't know.
Or at what point do the editors say enough? We also want to work on novels and picture books, and you know,
but it's
and
not
they
like
get maxed out.
It's not necessarily slowing down other avenues, I wouldn't think. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, do what the other guys have to say.
I agree with that. I also think just the cost of producing a graphic novel is so much higher. We're not going to see this buying up frenzy as we would with text only. You know, not that it's cheap to produce anything, but especially graphic novels, especially for color, for the younger audience that tends to gravitate toward that. Just the cost is so high. I imagine they're probably going to be a bit choosier with what they choose to buy because of that. So,
and meanwhile, the kids are, you know, reading them so voraciously, they can't print them fast enough.
Yeah.
It's a bit ironic, maybe.
I think some of the challenge we have is not the glut of content, but there's sort of two other things that jumped to my mind. One of which is there's no end to talented illustrators out there, and comics or graphic novel centric illustrators. but many of them are artists first, and there's a learning curve toward story development and finding fresh and unique stories, and something book length being very different than a few panel graphic novel for or comic for Instagram, something like that, or a zine. And then I think the flip side of that learning curve is the publishers. I feel like as agents, we're doing a lot of educating based on what our clients are teaching us about. This takes a long time. This, you can't you can't look at the same time frame as a picture book, which is 32 pages, and assume that that's about the same time that a 300-page graphic novel gets produced in. It's just not realistic. I think there are many editors who are eager to work in this space, but many of them don't have a lot of experience with graphic novel creation or even making illustrated books, which is a different art. Many of the editors, the last, they sort of came up in the time when YA was booming, and now they want to pivot to the next sort of booming space. But there's a lot to learn about what a illustrated project, what the production of that is like, what the editing of that is like. I'm not sure. I'd be curious to hear what the others are finding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I was interestingly thinking a little bit on the flip side of what you're saying, Molly, in that my list, while I do represent a fair number of author, illustrator, creators, I have a lot more writers. And what I'm finding is that a number of my novelists or picture book writers are starting to write graphic novel scripts as well, where they have a story and they're like, wait, this is not coming together in a prose only way, and then this is opening the door. So what I'm finding now is I have several graphic novel scripts that I've sold that were just on the text side without that pairing, and that's yet another kind of frame on it. And sounds like we need to get our heads together with your illustrators that that need storytellers.
They're all busy till 2027.
Yeah, you give one project, and that's the thing, as you said, it really does occupy a great deal more time than you would ever expect.
That's great. Turning our attention to the foreign market, how are you finding the selling of rights into the foreign market? Is it how's it going? Is there seemingly growth there? Is there success in markets that there wasn't a lot of demand for graphic novels prior to this? There's some of the obvious markets like France and Belgium and so on that have long histories with the medium. How are your titles succeeding as you go take them to the world?
I think selling graphic novels in the translation market is a bit more difficult than selling just a straight up novel, mainly because if the art does not resonate with that, the countries, and the people living there, because art is so subjective to begin with, but also visually it's so different, what's preferred everywhere, then that can be a block regardless of what the story is. And I think,
that just to interject, that's like a classic picture book challenge.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Yes, exactly. The other challenge is cost of printing is very different in every country, and also especially in 4-color. So I feel like there's a few hurdles for graphic novels that text only does not have. Because with text only, even if the voice doesn't resonate with them, the translator is probably going to change that when they translate the novel. So it's not quite the same when there's art involved. I will say that if the art, going into it, pitching it, if you think, oh, I know this is going to resonate, with French readers, or this is going to resonate with Spanish readers, and you keep those translation rights, then you focus your strategy on how to pitch it to them. So they can, read it, fall in love with it, and have a conversation about how you can build it in that market. But yeah, it's a little bit more difficult to say, I know this will sell in 40 different territories, because the art is so subjective.
That's
And translation comes into play because the way panels are composed is often to hold a particular amount of text. And when that is translated to a language that means the characters, there's double the amount of them or something like that, it can throw off the balance in ways that really you can't I don't think you can make a panel that holds any possible language. So there are just some factors about the actual art of translating that is very different. And also the fact that the time it takes, and often it's not it's not always the smartest strategy to sell foreign rights at the same time that you're selling them in the US, because often you're selling off just a partial and you may want to wait until you have the complete thing to see, what the ultimate vision became or something like that. So even the scouts, I feel like have gotten used to, they show up when the sale is made and they're like, so I come back in 2 years, and you're like, yeah, you come back in 2 years. And it's so different than any other kind of project.
Joan.
Yeah, I think they pretty much covered it.
Do you so style of art, of course, is always a challenge, and that's in reverse too when foreign projects are trying to find their way into the States. Cost of production is definitely an issue. Are there any markets, nations you can name that are you feel there's new opportunity, meaning they just weren't doing comic books, graphic novels at all, but now they're at least showing an interest. Maybe sales haven't been made, but they're asking for it. Where are you seeing new opportunities potentially?
So I don't sell translation rights for our agency anymore. We have a department that does that, but based on what they recently said, the Dutch market is asking a lot about graphic novels and have been making offers on graphic novels and heavily illustrated projects that we hadn't seen them really doing before. So I feel like they're really embracing graphic novels. I know that, a lot of the Spanish territories and Germany and France and China have always been really on board with considering graphic novels. But I think it boils down to, do the local bookstores have a section for that? Will they shelve it with the children's books? Do they shelve it with graphic novels? If they shelve it with graphic novels, are they looking for those children's graphic novels, or are they looking for more traditional adult graphic novels? And so it's really more of a conversation with the co-agents, and does the market currently have a space for this, or is this going to be a waiting game for the right time to really find the right partner?
Yeah, it's the whole ecosystem is in play as to whether things are going to have growth or not. Yeah, if the bookstores don't want them, then the publishers don't want them, and so on.
I do find also that sort of foreign translations or sales, whether out of the US to other countries or other countries into the US, or any combination, is really often very success driven. And so I think that even territories that maybe don't historically or haven't recently had a big presence in comics, I feel like as certain titles gain more visibility and kids are talking about them, and of course the global sphere, the global space is so permeable, where kids in all the countries are talking online together, and they want to read these books, they start requesting them, and I think that becomes sort of this system that feeds upon itself, and that leads to opening more doors, in the same way that the books that sell the most territories are the books that are the most popular often.
Yep.
That as comics continue to make their own space, make their flash, get these readers, the readers in all the different territories are going to demand their translations. And I think that's going to engender more and more growth in individual territories and countries.
And I would theorize that as these graphic novels, the ones that succeed at the highest level in the States, when they get converted to film and TV, that crosses all borders. And then the kids in this market see that movie, then they want the book that it was based on, and then that's just gonna keep pushing into all those markets. Just a theory. This is a two-part question. You know, Kathleen you had mentioned you represent a lot of foreign creators. Are they creating things that you are selling first into the U.S. market, or are these titles that they're having published in their market first, and then you're then representing those rights? And then for Joan and Molly, are you representing any foreign titles or creators?
So the clients I represent, a couple of them have sold before I signed them locally first with a local publisher. And then by the time I signed them, we think, you know, strategy in terms of how do we really capture the global audience that they already do have. And so then we, you know, sell into the US first and then come up with a strategy globally from there. I will say, like, once the book is published, as an agent, I try to ask questions and get numbers if I can on specific exports to certain areas of the world, because I think that's always a really good sales tool for publishers in those areas. Because while, you know, let's say, for instance, like the Spanish market hasn't picked up a Spanish translation for a book, if I can show, look at all the exports this US publisher has done in the Spanish markets with a graphic novel, kids don't necessarily have to read the text to follow the story. They can follow the art, they can follow. And so I feel like with graphic novels, there's that extra point of data that's really helpful to find those translations for authors and illustrators of graphic novels. So, which I know is slightly off topic, but previous conversation in this one. So
I'm going to circle back to a previous point as well, which is, I think one of the hesitancies with translation sales is the thing that is making particularly the contemporary middle grade graphic novels work in the US is sometimes the very thing that is preventing them from traveling, which is they do resonate because they are so much about a very American experience, the school experience, the sort of day-to-day that is familiar here, but that may look very different in other countries, or they have their own versions of the sort of slice of life stories that are done by homegrown artists. I think one interesting thing, though, is that some of the creators do have a very strong Instagram presence. I mean, Kathleen, I think you're the one who has scooped up many of those in a really wonderful way, and their audiences are global, right? Because Instagram already is global. Art visuals are global, so you can see where the audience is coming from, even from the get-go, and sometimes that is also information that you can provide to a publisher.
Joan, what are you engaged with any foreign creators? You know, are you representing anything like that?
I mean, I think that the foreign creators I work with tend, by and large, to be creating in English for the, or, you know, for the US space. That's kind of my focus particularly. So yeah, that's, you know, I don't work myself directly hands-on with the foreign rights.
Right.
We have teams that do that. But I think the market that I'm mostly looking toward at the moment is that sort of primary publishing there. Just again, because of the thing with the differences in market and in readership and in all of those things. But, you know, but that's not to say that it would need to stay that way, because I feel like, you know, if there's anything that those of us in this business are always doing, it's looking out for what's new and exciting and different and interesting. And, you know, it just takes that one person or that one project to get you excited about a completely new direction or, you know, voice or mode or medium. And in fact, I think that is the most exciting thing about this business, is that that moment of pivoting and of sort of eye-opening wonder, where you discover something that you didn't even know you had been dreaming of your whole life, kind of thing. So
this is a question I don't know that any of us can answer, but do you feel, you know, with the the boom in the US with middle grade graphic novels, all graphic novels, do you feel the editors are looking abroad to import books? I know how to answer that question for every other genre of book, just over the course of my career. But do we have any insights into that?
I think some of the houses are, and in some ways it depends on how engaged those editors already have been in the comic space. Random House Graphic jumps to mind. A lot of their initial list was imports because it was a way to sort of get up and running faster, but also pretty much everyone on their team has deep background in the comics world. They kind of knew how to get to the things
Right.
in a way that not every editor has access to or would know how to get there, even if they were looking for it.
And not very few editors I've found in 25 plus years have that instinct. They just don't tend to look abroad. They've got a lot on their plates for one thing, but it's the rare editor who is very diligent about that, very determined to whether no matter what kind of books we're talking about, who like consistently always has their eye on the foreign market for opportunities.
Well, you also the language too. It's that there's that initial barrier that sort of has to be overcome if you're going to be looking for French material. You have to have some familiarity with that. So I would imagine that is one.
Yeah. Always, of course. We're down to 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask one last question that I'd like each of you to answer in turn. And that's really to predict where you think graphic novels are going in the next 1 to 5 years. Just what's in the immediate, let's go 1 to 2 years even, the immediate future of graphic novels in your experience. We can go in any order, or I can prompt
I'll go first.
Molly.
I don't mind.
Kathleen.
I actually think in the graphic novel space, we're going to see a huge surge in manga specifically. Netflix has been adding a lot of anime to its channel, and the other streaming channels are following. And I've had a few editors reach out saying, we don't have a manga dedicated list, but it's something I'm really interested in. And they're focusing specifically on contemporary romance storylines, but it has to be manga specifically. So I think in a few years, we're going to start seeing a lot of those pop up, both on the YA side, especially, but also the children's side as an introduction to manga storytelling. So I think that'll be interesting to keep an eye out for.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out for that. Molly, Joan?
I think in some ways in the US, we're in the boom of selling still, and a lot of the books that have been sold in the boom have not yet hit the market, are still being, inked as we are talking or colored as we are talking. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens when, we certainly had the early generations of graphic novels that kind of paved the way that now these are standing on the shoulders of, but it's going to be interesting to see that sort of second, third generation of graphic novels arriving. And I think an interesting thing in the US is that the timing of graphic novels booming has also aligned with the hunger for projects from creators' own lived experiences. So my hope would be that we are going from the early days of graphic novels to be much more conscious of representing all types of readers in our stories and not centering a specific experience, particularly the sort of white and homogenous experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's very similar to what I was thinking too, in the sense of in the next 1 to 2 years, we're going to start to see a lot of these that have been sold start to come out. And to build again on what you were just saying, Molly, I think that the comics space has I feel like there's a lot of marginalized voices that have found expression in the creation of comics. And traditionally the medium just has been very indie, very, sort of grassroots. And I think that expanding of platform and broadening of scope is going to just give even more legitimacy and platform and ability to, I think we're going to start to see just a really broad range of voices and perspectives and experiences and lives. And I also think that in the next couple of years, we're going to see the young graphic novel kind of come into its own, that chapter book early reader age. A lot of editors have been asking about that and buying them. And I think that is a space that is still being early published into. So I think we're going to be looking at that kind of really finding its legs and seeing some breakouts in some hopefully very exciting ways.
That's great. That's great. Well, that is all we have time for. I want to thank Joan and Molly and Kathleen for participating. That was, for as much as I pretend to be an expert, I learned a lot. So I at least got a lot out of this. I want to thank all the people who joined us. This will be preserved or archived, or there'll be plenty of people watching this later. But this was I thought this was a fantastic panel, and thank you.